All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to join us for our webinar today. Just before we get started, I did want to let everybody know that currently you are muted. We'd love to have you participate and ask questions. There is a question box in the control panel. We will be taking all of those questions at the end of the presentation, but if you have any technical issues, those are going to be addressed right away. If the technical issues persist, a recording is going to be sent out to everybody, so you can always view it then. And we do have some resources that you can download to help with that. Now, back to the presentation. My name is Marcus. I'm a client services associate for Tutor.com. And when talking to a whole bunch of programs these past couple of months, a lot of them expressed how difficult it is for those who are getting back into the job market or taking the plunge for the first time. So we just kind of wanted to help out and make that transition a bit easier for you. While many of you have access to Tutor.com, pretty much what's going to be covered today will be great for anybody just looking for some advice or guidance. And on our team, we have tons of folks working behind the scenes with our tutors. And one of those I would like to introduce. Her name is Rachel Ekman, and she helps run quality control for us, making sure that our students and tutors are having the best educational experience possible. She has over 5 years and hundreds of hours running resume and job help workshops under her belt, and she is the leading expert in career services over here, and I'm delighted to have her speak, so I'll just let her take the floor.
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you everyone for being here today. We really appreciate you taking the time, like Marcus said. So I'll start by telling you a little bit about myself. I am actually a mechanic and a technician by trade, and I transitioned from the tech workforce to full-time education back in 2015. But I have been a teacher, tutor, and counselor in some capacity or another for about the last 20 years. And for the last 5, I've been doing resume and portfolio writing in addition to workshops and presentations for students, educators, and employers. I'm very happy to be here doing this presentation for everyone because this time is a real exciting reinvention of the workforce as we've known it. To start off, we need to take a look at the current economy and job market. People are using words like recession and depression and unemployment rates, but what we're really experiencing right now, in my opinion, is a transformation. This time last year, I was giving presentations and lectures about the gradual shift in the landscape of the working world. Changes in our technological capabilities, new methods of connectivity have allowed us to rethink the notion of presenteeism as a benchmark for productivity and value in the workforce. And we'd been on the cusp of a new frontier in both education and employment for quite some time. But it might have been years before any real change had happened until COVID-19. In the midst of the pandemic, corporations, companies, schools, and small businesses who had until now perhaps only begun to dip their toes into the water of their digital capabilities found themselves compelled to dive in and sink or swim. Months later, regardless of any other outcomes of this pandemic, one thing is very clear. The working world will never be the same. Well over 20 million jobs were lost at the height of coronavirus, and now we're beginning a major correction. According to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, over 2.5 million jobs were filled in the month of May 2020, and that's not applied for, but actually hired. And those numbers will continue to climb as reopening progresses. There is no doubt that the jobs will be there or are already there, but they won't look the same as they did before. This will likely be the most competitive job market we've seen in a long time, possibly ever. With virtual employment as a successful model, employers can expand their talent pool of candidates exponentially. So strategy and the ability to navigate the online job application process and your presentation of credentials will be key factors in the future of employment. One of the things that people know very little about, unfortunately, but is really a critical factor in online hiring is the ATS, or the Applicant Tracking System. That name is deceiving though, because online hiring systems aren't set up for selection and tracking. They're actually designed for elimination. The original ATS was the solution to a problem for large corporations and organizations who were inundated with too many applicants and couldn't reasonably filter through them. So with the use of ATS, over 75% of resumes will actually be filtered out before they even reach the desk of the hiring personnel at any given organization. What does that mean to you as a job seeker? It means you need to know how not to be eliminated. A lot goes into a resume, and that's the first step. But the two most critical components to consider when drafting your resume are format and content. You want to keep your resume looking clean and professional. A professional block at the top with your name, city and state, one telephone number, a professional email address. If you have a LinkedIn profile, it can also be a great thing to include in that professional block as well. I always recommend not putting your information into a header though, because some ATS software is unable to parse data from a header, and that alone could potentially get you screened out. So make sure that when you're putting your block of information, of contact information at the top, it's outside of the header and in the actual body of the document. The most effective type of resume in the current job market is called a combination resume or a hybrid resume. In other words, it combines brief summaries of your position, your previous work experience, with a few bullets to highlight achievements and standout functions. You want to avoid complicated templates. Don't include graphics, charts, or photos of yourself. These fancy formats are tempting because you want your resume to stand out, but at the end of the day, they won't make it through the ATS scan. So the information in the graphics, tables, and charts will come out blank or jumbled once they've passed through the scanning process. And that's particularly damaging if your table is full of your keywords and your hard skills, because none of that is going to actually make it through the scanning process. Resume language is very important. Your resume should be written entirely in resume language, which means no I, no talking about yourself in the third person. Your previous positions should be written in past tense, and your current employment should be written in present tense. And you want your resume to be in chronological order with your most current position at the very top, and then you're going to go back from there. But don't go back more than 10 or 15 years. And that includes your education. If your degree is more than 10 years old, include the degree, but don't put the year that you've graduated, because anything more than 10 or 15 years old is going to open you up to potential bias like ageism, or the notion that perhaps some of your qualifications are outdated because they occurred so long ago. Putting too much on your resume can be just as damaging as not putting enough. Employers are more likely to toss a resume out than to try to sift through it to get to the relevant information. One of the biggest issues that my clients encounter is relinquishing that desire to try to put everything that you do into your resume. This is a challenge. If you work a full-time job at 40 hours a week, then you're putting in at least 2,080 hours annually. And that's an important number to know, by the way, 2,080. It's helpful in converting hourly pay to annual salary and vice versa. But that 2080 doesn't even include overtime, work that you take home to try to catch up, commute times, time you spend stressing out about work. There are 8,700 somewhat hours in a year. And most of us will spend well over 25% of that time somehow engaged in work. So the amount of stuff that we do every day is clearly not going to be able to be summarized on a 1 or 2 page document. And determining what really matters to a future employer can be not just challenging, but also sometimes emotionally draining. The key is to focus on your hard skills, your achievements, and your credentials. Another thing you want to be mindful of is your document title. If you're uploading your resume as an attachment, the file name should be simple and professional. First name, last name, resume. Be sure that you're not sending your employer a resume that's called Resume Draft 17. Keywords are very important. But I'm going to quote my favorite boss here to use a term that she used to describe an interview she once conducted. Keyword salad. This is something that you don't want to have. This is a trap to avoid. Yes, keywords are critically important in the ATS system. However, you don't want your resume to look like you cut and pasted from the job posting either, especially since hopefully your resume will eventually land on a real person's desk who will evaluate it further. And keywords alone aren't enough anyway. They're meant to complement the content of your qualifications, not replace them. So look through your job postings, find the keywords, and a good way to do that is to look for words that repeat themselves throughout the post, or look at multiple postings of similar positions and find the words that they all have in common. That's your best strategy for finding your keywords. And make sure that when you do have your keywords written down and you're plugging them into your resume, that you put them in multiple different locations throughout the post. Don't just put, some of my skills include Java, Python, and Google Cloud. Put it in multiple places. If you used it at 3 of your different jobs, make sure you're including that keyword at all 3 jobs, because that will give weight to the amount of experience that you have with that skill. What is a power verb? Power verb is actually more commonly referred to as an action verb, but I like the term power better because that's what it gives. These verbs will give weight to your achievements as opposed to diluting your achievements. See, persuasive writing is all about word choice. You need to think of your resume as a written elevator speech. You need to pack as much punch into as short a time as possible. It's your own personal ad for how outstanding of an employee you can be. And the first look at a resume from an employer is 15 to 20 seconds. So the thesaurus will be your best friend here. Compare these 2 sentences. If I were to tell you that I assisted other departments with successful company-wide projects, you'd say, okay, well, that's good. So you're a team player and you assisted. But if I were to rephrase it and tell you I collaborated with cross-functional teams to facilitate successful projects at an organizational level, well, that just sounds a little bit more impressive of a task, doesn't it? So both of these sentences are telling you the same information, but they're framing it in a very different manner. And often that can be the difference between impressing a hiring manager and just looking like another candidate in the pool. What are screen out factors? Screen out factors are things that are very likely to get your resume tossed out at some point before you've even made it to an interview. And there are 2 rounds of screen outs. One is the ATS, which is the automatic filtration process, which we know is heavy duty. 75% of resumes are screened out online. And that's then followed by the initial look from the employer, which we know is like a 15 to 20-second scan of your resume. The thing that's important to remember about screen out factors is that they're rooted in the desire to find the best long-term candidate for the position. The National Association of Colleges and Employers estimates the cost of hiring a new employee at a company of up to 500 people at an average of $7,600. Another study done by the Society for Human Resource Management found the average at around $4,100. Either way, that's quite a price tag for someone who seems unlikely to stick around at the organization for very long. No company wants to spend thousands of dollars every couple of years on the same position. But remember, screen out factors are not necessarily going to carry into your interview. So what would get you screened out in your resume would not necessarily be detrimental in an interview where you'll have the opportunity to explain and present your work history and your qualifications in a positive light. So mitigating the appearance of screen out factors on your resume is very critical. Here at Tutor.com, we have a wonderful relationship with the DoD and partnership with the DoD and other military organizations. And we take great pride in the fact that we have the opportunity to just go above and beyond for our service members and their families whenever possible. The transition from military to civilian employment can be very challenging. And it's a unique situation that 99% of the country doesn't actually really understand. Crafting a military resume is delicate work, and again, can be exhausting. The bright side is that there are a lot of great resources out there to help. And I've listed a lot of them at the end of this slide, some of my favorites. And Tutor.com is here to help in any way that we can. The online application process is daunting. Up to 80% of job seekers have described the job search process as time-consuming, stressful, and difficult. So we're going to go over a few things that can help to mitigate that stress and give you a more successful outcome and a more successful experience. The amount of effort and strategy that you put into your resume and your job search is going to determine your long-term job satisfaction. And it's important to keep that in mind because the end really will justify the means here. If you want to land the perfect job, you're going to have to work for it. But you have to take your time. The online application process can be very redundant and very tedious. So you have to create a strategy that will make every application count. Set a limit of how many applications you're going to fill out per day and per week. Do research and due diligence on every organization before you just jump into filling out the application. That will help you to prioritize your job applications and front load the ones that are most important to you that you're most qualified for. And that'll also help you to weed out catfishing and other online job scams that are out there. I suggest using a calendar. Select days that you're going to do research into organizations, that you're going to find job postings, that you're going to organize your job postings into a prioritized list, and then select days that you're going to spend dedicated to filling out the applications. The job search process is lengthy and it is difficult to get through. The important thing to remember is that you're not the only one. You have to have patience. The average job search is 5 months long. And personally, I find that statistic to be probably a little bit on the low side. I think it might even take longer to find some jobs. It's a process though. So if you've been searching for a job for a month and you've been filling out all these applications and you've sent in 20, and you've gotten some rejections and some you've never even heard from and some you had to reject for whatever reason, that's all a normal part of the process. Don't allow that to get you frustrated and don't become discouraged. Just keep in mind that again, it's a process and you just have to get through the process to get to where you want to be, which is the best job for you. The new technological age that we're in right now has both benefits and pitfalls. One of the benefits when it comes to professional networking is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is an excellent professional networking tool. Over 90% of recruiters have hired someone that they've found through LinkedIn. I strongly recommend having a LinkedIn profile, but you have to have a strong profile. Having an incomplete one can do more harm than good. Your LinkedIn profile should align with your resume. I'm not saying that you need to cut and paste the information from your resume into your LinkedIn profile, but if an employer receives your resume and your application and then goes to your LinkedIn profile and sees completely different, contradictory, or outdated information, it will raise a red flag and quite possibly get your resume tossed out, no questions asked. Also, be careful about making your LinkedIn page too social in nature. Everything on there should be professionally driven. Nothing that you'd post on social media belongs on your LinkedIn page, and that includes your photo. Your photo should be something that resembles some kind of just professional HR badge photo, headshot. There used to be an expression that you'd hear all the time, and you don't hear it as much anymore. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. Well, in the digital age, your first impression is made before you even have the opportunity to introduce yourself. These recruiters and employers are looking into you and checking up on you before you even make it to an interview. So you need to consider, is your email address professional? Is your voicemail message professional? If I'm an employer and I call you to offer you an interview and I get your voicemail, will I still want to offer you that job interview at the end of the beep? Would an employer think less of you or perhaps be able to form some kind of a biased opinion about you if they were to check your social media presence? Because they check. How will your online activities reflect on their organization? More than 50% of employers today report rejecting a candidate after looking at their social media. And 95% of recruiters are likely to check your social media presence before even contacting you for a position. So you need to be mindful of your digital footprint and you need to do an honest self assessment. If it's necessary, scrub your online digital profile before you fill out your first application, before anyone has the opportunity to see it. Now, it's important to remember that your resume and your job application don't get you a job. They get you to the interview. So we still have more preparation to do. And whether you're preparing for an in-office interview or an online interview, the goal is always the same. You want the interview from start to finish to be focused on your professional qualifications and what will make you the absolute best candidate for the job. Everything you reveal about yourself through verbal and nonverbal interactions, information you divulge, appearance, behavior, it's all an opportunity for an employer to allow their own personal bias to cloud that evaluation of you. And it's distracting the interview from the main point. You are the best person from the job. So the average length of a job interview is 40 minutes, and yet over a third of employers surveyed indicated that they know within the first 90 seconds if they're going to hire that candidate. And the things that they note, other than professional qualifications, as having an impact on their opinion of an employee or a potential employee, include posture, handshake, fidgeting, playing with their hair, eye contact. So make sure that you are prepared for your interview, you feel confident, you're not nervous, you're not engaging in any nervous habits, and you're presenting your absolute best self. When you're doing an online interview, all of that same guidance still applies, except just with a little bit extra, because now you have to consider your background. Now you're in your own territory. So what is the background of your interview telling the employer? Try to select a muted area, something where there's very little to no background noise, very little to any background distractions. You don't want the employer sitting there looking at the crazy poster on the wall behind you and not focused on why you would be such an outstanding employee for their organization. Avoid drinking and eating during an interview. This can be tempting when we're in our own home or in our own space, but really you don't want to do anything on an online interview that you wouldn't do in an in-person interview. So I recommend not eating or drinking anything, don't chew any gum, just get through the interview and then get your snack or whatever it is afterwards. And I also always recommend dressing from head to toe to include shoes as if you were going into an office interview. And the reason for this is because subconsciously, it will change your demeanor. If you're dressed professionally, as opposed to, well, I'll throw on, an Oxford shirt, but with my pajama bottoms. You'll have, as some of us are so prone to do in this digital age, but you will still have a completely different demeanor if you're wearing a full dress pants, shoes. It will change your posture. It will change the way you conduct yourself, and it will really, truly give you a little bit of a leg up in how you're presenting yourself during that interview. There are a lot of tough interview questions, Some of them will be professionally driven, some of them will be technical in nature, but the absolute most commonly asked question and most difficult to navigate in job interviews across the board for all professions is tell me about yourself. Tell me about yourself is an icebreaker type of a question, and it's designed for the employer to give you the opportunity to get comfortable, to start a dialogue. But the thing that they don't tell you that's sneaky is that it also kind of sets the tone for some of the questions they may ask you to follow up. Tell me about yourself can open up the door to personal information that you are not legally bound to divulge. Interviewers are not allowed to ask you your marital status, whether or not you have children, your family background, your sexual orientation, your political affiliations, your age, your ethnic background. They won't ask you those questions because they're not allowed. But if they say, well, tell me about yourself, and you volunteer that information, now you've given them the opportunity to allow their own personal biases or preferences to sneak into the interview where they're not supposed to be. If possible, try to keep all of the information professional in nature. So if an employer says to you, tell me about yourself, and you lead with, well, my education background is in XYZ subjects, and that's what got me interested in this industry, and I've been pursuing a career for this long, and now I have all of this experience, and I'm really interested in joining your organization because XYZ reasons. Now you've set the tone for the interview to be completely professional in nature. In addition to that, you've given yourself the opportunity to give them some other information about your credentials and about your dedication and about your investment into the career that you've chosen that they may not have otherwise asked you about. So you can spin the tell me about yourself question. Make sure you have a script prepared. Don't read the script, but practice it because it's very easy to be thrown off when you're nervous, when you're staring at the employer face to face, when you're put on the spot, so to speak. So practice for tell me about yourself because in 90% of interviews, that is one of the first questions that's asked. Last but not least, the best advice I can give any job seeker in this market is to stay positive. Don't let the job search get you down. Learn from your mistakes, appreciate every new experience, and never lose faith in the fact that you will find the job that you're looking for and it'll pay off in the end. And with that, I will hand it back over to you, Marcus.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all of that. Now, before we get to the question portion of this, which by the way, if you have any questions, feel free to enter them into the question box on your control panel. But I did want to just kind of briefly touch upon how Tutor.com can help you. Obviously, our online tutors are here to help sharpen your skills. So whether that's learning a new language, refining your writing, or so you actually understand how to do anything in Excel, our tutors are here to help. And obviously, there's so much more, so many more subjects that we can do. And we also do have job help options. So if you're working on writing a cover letter or a resume, or you just want to kind of prepare and practice for an interview, even if you want to just help, you want some help applying for a job, our tutors are there for you. Obviously, availability kind of varies from program to program. But if you ever need some more information, you can always reach out to your school or library, or worst case scenario, you can reach out to us and we'll point you in the right direction. And now while we're waiting for questions to come in, Rachel, actually, one of the things that I was thinking of was, can you tell us about the different types of ATS scan filters and how you can kind of tell which ones you're kind of getting into?
Absolutely. The trick is to look at the URL in the application. Very often, if the application links you to an outside website or to a different URL from the one that you've clicked on when it says apply position, it'll have the title of the system in there. So you take a look at that URL, and then you can actually look up that ATS system, find out what kind of filtration that software uses. So it's a sneaky way to know how to customize your resume if you will, to each position. So rather than just changing a couple of words here and there, if you look at one system and you're applying with, for example, Taleo is a very common ATS system, and you know that they're going to be looking for questions as to how long you have experience in a particular skill set. You'll know that you want to duplicate that skill set a couple more times throughout your resume so that it's evident that you have a lot more experience in that skill.
Awesome, thank you. Now, we did have a question come in asking, will an employer look unfavorably on your application if your Facebook page or social media is set to private when they go to try to like take a look at your social media?
I don't believe so. I think the egregious offenses of social media are actually occur when the social media is not private, and when somebody can look onto your page and find all of your political opinions, all of your drinking habits, all of your extracurricular activities. Those are the things that you need to be mindful of.
Awesome, thank you. And kind of similar to that, how do you handle if they do bring up a personal question that they're not allowed to ask in an interview?
That is a really good question. I always recommend having some kind of an idea of what you're going to do to professionally dodge any questions that you're not comfortable answering. So, if, for example, you don't feel comfortable answering any questions about your kids having children, I had a student who once was on a job interview, and it came to light during the interview. The employer asked her, and she answered that she was a single mom. And it was actually during the tell me about yourself question, she volunteered the information. And at one point, the employer said to her, well, how do you expect to be able to put in this many hours if you're a single parent? Do you think that you'll be able to handle the workload? Now, again, not an acceptable question for an employer to ask. And yet, she had opened the door to the conversation and continued to engage in it. So it can be tricky. There's no easy answer, but the best advice I can give you is to have a really strong dodge prepared. So find a way, without saying I don't feel comfortable answering that question, to steer it back to what you do feel comfortable with. So if an employer says to you, do you have any kids at home? Say something along the lines of, "Oh man, I just sometimes I can't even remember if I have kids or not because I'm working so hard." Something that will allow you to turn the table back to the professional side of the conversation. Most employers, most interviewers are very cognizant of what they can and can't ask you. So it's not going to happen too often. And if it does, a really well laid out dodge will almost always resolve that issue very quickly because it'll kind of bring them back around too.
Awesome. And I've seen some questions come in about that someone's out of the workforce for over a year. How do you handle those kind of things in your resume?
That's also a really great question because employment gaps can be a killer. They really can. There's a couple of things that I recommend. You can take a few, and I know this sounds it sounds, like you're adding work to it, but it's very helpful. You can take some certifications online, some certification classes, and you can actually create an employment block that says, professional development, and list all of the courses you've been taking and the certifications that you've accrued in that year that you haven't been employed. Another really great way is if you're, for example, a full-time student, and so you haven't worked since your last job because you've been finishing a master's degree. Put your education as an work experience block. Put that you were a student from this year to this year. Another great way to mitigate employment gaps is to include years only as opposed to month and year on your resume. It's not going to fix it overall. You'll still have to explain at some point that you have a gap year. However, during the scam process, it's not going to kick you off for that gap because it'll say like, okay, well, you were employed in the year 2019. Doesn't matter that it was only until June. it just knows that you were employed during that year.
Mhm.
So there are a lot of different tricks that you can do to kind of mitigate. But again, I love the professional development block because it shows that you haven't just been sailing, across the world for a year, that you've picked up 4 Microsoft certifications and taken 3 online classes. And it doesn't matter when you've taken them. You don't have to put dates. Just put, I've been focusing on professional development for the last year.
Awesome. And kind of similar to that, if you're a stay-at-home parent for a while and are looking to re-enter the workforce, do you do something similar to that, like you mentioned?
No, I wouldn't ever recommend falsifying anything. So if you've been a stay-at-home parent and you're re-entering the workforce, that's something that I would address right up front in the summary block. And I wouldn't say stay-at-home parent. I wouldn't use that term in your resume. What I would put is previous XYZ professional, currently poised and ready to re-enter the workforce in the XYZ field. Put it in a frame it in a way where you are just ready to jump back in with both feet. And then you might want to add again a few certifications, a few online courses, something that shows that you've supplemented your time off with preparedness to come back to the workforce in its current state.
Awesome. And when applying to a job on your resume, um, is it good to tailor it for that specific job? Do you include volunteer time to enhance experience? Same thing with internships. What do you recommend for that?
I always recommend, first of all, always put internships. Internships are work experience. People tend to devalue internships because they're very often unpaid. However, that doesn't make a difference. Whether or not you're being paid for your work, you're working. And another thing to keep in mind is that an internship, any leadership in your internship, your coworker, your direct supervisor, management, is also a very helpful reference to have. So if you've done an internship for 2 months in a law firm and now you're applying as a paralegal, that law firm can be your reference. They can be your job reference. It's also 2 months of job experience. So internships are wonderful. Volunteer work is sometimes hit or miss. So you want to be careful with volunteer work. Never ever, the number one guideline I give for volunteer work is never ever ever try to fit it into your resume. If you have space at the bottom and if you want to put affiliations or, professional development, or if you want to do community interactions, if you're applying for a job that has some kind of community interaction element in it, then that's a beneficial thing. But if you're applying for a job in the business world and you volunteer at a soup kitchen, although it's an incredibly noble and wonderful thing to do, it's not necessarily relevant. So it's very often better to leave the content just strictly professional in nature unless there's a reason to put it in. If the organization is philanthropic and they talk all about in the job posting all of this community work that they do, then absolutely put that community service work in. But if there's nothing to suggest that they would, for lack of a better word, care or be impressed by it, then I would suggest maybe leaving it off, particularly if it's in any way political or religious in affiliation, because you really always just want to leave any political or religious affiliations completely off of your resume.
Got it. Now, when applying to jobs online, often they have you submit your resume and cover letter and then ask you to basically enter in all that information again. Is there any
Yes.
way to get around that and just do the resume and cover letter, or are you just kind of forced to basically retype everything out?
You need to retype everything out. And that's why people find the job search online to be so frustrating. Quite frankly, that is the number one thing that's cited, is the redundance of giving your resume and cover letter and then having to put all of the same information into the application. But the best way to look at that is, and I hate to say it, a lot of people will undermine their potential by being lazy about the application process when it comes to the actual filling out of the job application. The best way I can frame it for you is to think about years ago, before we had this, if you can remember that far back, before we had these online applications, you would go to an employer and present yourself and say, are you hiring? I'd like to fill out an application. And then you'd fill out the application, right?
Mhm.
And then at some point they'd ask you for a resume, whether it's that same day or in the interview or prior to that, or if they say, well, leave a resume and we'll call you if we're interested. Those things used to be separated. So it's kind of a weird technological anomaly that now they're done in conjunction with one another, and it feels unnecessary and really just painful. But they're both very critical parts of the hiring process. So it's important to remember that no matter what your resume, however awesome it may be, you still have to fill out a job application in order to be hired. And it's also very important to resist the urge to copy and paste your resume into your application. Don't do it. Fill out two separate things. And that's why I so strongly encourage people to limit the number of job applications that they do at a time, so that you really don't feel exhausted by that process and you take the time to do it correctly.
Awesome. Now I'm seeing someone ask if you're switching careers, is it all about just using power verbs and keywords to kind of make your application kind of similar or what they're looking for?
That's a wonderful question also. I love this question. Actually, Forbes magazine just dubbed this the best time that they've ever seen for career transition employees. They think that this is the height of the potential for someone who wants to transition in careers right now because of everything that's going on, because the entire job market is transitioning, right? So this is actually a wonderful time to be changing careers. It's not so much about the power verbs, it's about the crossover skills. If you look online, if you approach any kind of professional resume writing service, whether or not you intend to go that route, there are resumes that are called career transition resumes, and those are resumes that will focus on your universally applicable hard skills and soft skills that will make you an excellent candidate for any job for which you apply. So if you're changing from being a security guard to a scrum master because you've recently completed this extremely comprehensive computer science set of courses, there are things that you can pull from your resume that will be excellent keywords, even from an unrelated field. The two number one tips that I will give you about crafting a transition resume are to be careful about how many jobs you list. So if you have, 20 years of experience in one industry and now you're looking to make a change, don't go back 20 years. I would say don't go back any further than 10, 2 to 3 jobs max, because you don't want to automatically give the impression that you're not transitionable. And the other thing I would suggest is put your credentials above your work experience. There's no hard and fast rule about how your resume has to be formatted. So if you're transitioning from one field to another, then start with your summary block, all about how you're going to be great in this new field. Then do a set of skills, core competencies in the new field that you feel are going to be really relevant and pertinent. Then put education, certifications, technical skills, everything that's relevant, and then put your work experience at the bottom. And when you write up your work experience, don't focus on the daily ins and outs of the operations for that field. Focus on the outstanding skills that you picked up while you were working in that field that will carry over to your new career.
Awesome. And as our final question, because I think it's a little bit fitting, someone was advised to send a thank you note or a letter after an interview. Do you still think that that's a good practice to do?
Absolutely. There is never a wrong time to be polite and appreciative and interactive with a potential employer. As a matter of fact, I always recommend saying thank you twice during an interview. Once in the beginning, thank you for taking the time to see me. I really look forward to this interview. And then at the end, again, I really just want to thank you again for your time and I hope to hear from you again soon. The thank you for an interview note used to be absolutely 100% across the board in every industry. We've gotten away from that because we've kind of gotten away from luxurious communication. Everything is now centered around brevity and, text shorthand, which you never should do with an employer, by the way. but absolutely, a thank you note can never hurt, or a follow-up thank you phone call, even an email, as long as it's professionally drafted in the theme of a thank you note. There's never a wrong time to thank an employer for their time and show that you're following through and that you're still highly interested in their organization.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That seems to be all the time that we have for today. Just a reminder for all attendees, a recording will be sent out within a day or so, so keep an eye out on that. That way you can always rewatch and relearn some things in case you missed it. Otherwise, I hope to see you on some other webinars we have coming up, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.